Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is politics and populism. Politics used to be simple. It was like a game. Someone won and someone lost. Not long ago, the differences between the two political sides were not that significant, and the pendulum in the country did not swing dramatically from right to left. While the two main parties had differences when it came to governing, the parties worked together to pass laws and establish effective policies that were the nation's best interests. Both sides worked together. Over the years, things have changed, especially the game of politics has changed. Dare I say that those changes have not been for the better. Most of the changes have been in the messaging. I have an older cousin. He is a man of tradition. Tradition informs every aspect of his life. He wears the same shoes he always wore, the same style, that is, the same ties, the same shirts. He has worn the same style for the past 60 years. He does not like change. Actually, he has always defined himself as a moderate. That was his philosophy in life. He is an Aristotelian. He believes in the golden mean and that extremes were to be shunned at all costs. He explains that extreme ideas are destructive and they are the antithesis of stable lifestyle. Extremism is simply wrong, he believes. The ideal behavior is the ideal philosophy of life was the golden mean. Neither a person nor a society should ever sway too far left nor too far right. This modality typified and reflected much of American life, especially in political life. Many people in the U.S. are centrists. Many voters in the U.S. are centrists. For many people, they have voted Democrat in the last election and Republican in the election before. The average U.S. voter leans slightly left and slightly right. That's the average. As a result, in the past, the differences between one party and the other party was not as dramatic as they are today. One of the major changes in today's politics in the U.S. is that it has developed into a strange conglomeration of populism and fashion. The fashion show is obvious. The Washington Post refers to the feeling good with Kamala Harris. This is the first time I can remember the feel-good effect as a variable in elections and electability. It's very unusual. Populism, on the other hand, is front and center in both parties. Populism is best defined as a message crafted to the masses, to the people. It's specifically not a message to the elite elements in society. Populism is a very successful style of political communication. Populism distills very complicated ideas and makes them simple and easily digestible. Today, both parties are adroit at parsing and crafting messages that are so simplistic and so black and white. Kamala Harris's proposal to tackle the inflationary economy is the perfect example of populism. Again, even the Washington Post editorial was extremely disappointed and frustrated with Harris's economic plan. When the Washington Post is criticizing Kamala Harris and the campaign, that means they must see a glaring issue upon which they cannot remain silent. The Washington Post would never normally speak an unkind word about Harris because that would mean giving Trump an indirect compliment, and that's a very important element. The Washington Post said that the plan, the Harris plan, offered no specifics and was filled with populist gimmicks. My point, populism. That's my point exactly. Remember, the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos. The Post is clearly entrenched in the left. There's nothing wrong with that. Just recognize it. There is no other way to interpret this editorial. It is a scathing attack on Harris and her plan. Remember, an editorial is the point of view of the editorial board of the newspaper. The board discusses together, agrees on the point of view, and then one person crafts the editorial. The editorial is always unsigned. The Washington Post has had their daggers out for Trump and would never want to intentionally or unintentionally help Trump. I understand that also. That's their point of view. The Washington Post has obscured and deliberately avoided certain topics because covering them might accidentally aid Trump in his re-election campaign. That makes sense. They have obscured news and realities that made Biden and Harris look bad. In other words, they were not going to do that. That was especially the case regarding Biden's cognition and health. And that was very sad, very disappointing. So again, if the Washington Post is saying this, there is a real deep issue at stake. In this case, the Harris economic plan is a big goose egg. Now, anyone who studied economics knows that no single decision will fix the economy. Neither the economy cannot be corrected in a single act. Everyone knows that. Back to my cousin. There was a reason why he insisted that there were dangers in embracing extremes. The reason is exactly the dangers of populism. When extremely difficult issues are reduced to simple solutions, real answers will not be found. This is no easy way. I know that. There's no easy way in politics. Politics has been converted into soundbites and populism. Unfortunately, I do not see any path back. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the New York Post written by Ruth Weiss. It is entitled, "Pro-Hamas Protesters Are Heirs to Decades Worth of Anti-West Propaganda." It was published on August 19, 2024. Ruth Weiss is always insightful. In this case, her point is clear and very important, but lost on most Americans. That's important to recognize. Lost on most Americans. This is how Ruth Weiss begins. October 7th is widely recognized as the deadliest day for the Jews since the Holocaust. Yet some Americans, notably tens of thousands marching on the Democrat National Convention in Chicago this week, are celebrating the cloning of Nazism. Last century, the United States led the fight against those massacring the Jews. Yet today's college students are cheering on Hitler's successors. Many American Jews were shocked, but not surprised, when anti-Semitism shot up virulently here on October 8th. Campuses that should have protested the mass murder, rape, infanticide, torture, beheading, and kidnapping of peaceful civilians rallied instead against Israel, home to almost half the Jews left in the world. Weiss now explains that you shouldn't be fooled. Do not be fooled, she says. That is the same type of hatred that we're seeing now that has existed before. She continues, it was the same anti-Semitism we have seen for more than a century, so no surprise, but a shock to many when the rhetoric came from the political left. Weiss now explains the parallels between then and now. She writes, in the early 20th century, fascists won American adherents by appealing to ultranationalism, the same impulse that brought Hitler to power and made him Chancellor of Germany in 1933. Anti-Semitism, an anti-liberal movement conceived in the 1870s, accused Jews of exploiting emancipation and citizenship to conquer Germany from within. Weiss argues that one of the main differences between then and now is German refugees were anti-Hitler then. She writes, but German Americans did not burn the American flag. They sought an alliance with the stronger United States. Germans who taught at American universities were generally anti-fascists, liberal refugees from Hitler. By the time Hitler croaked in his bunker, two new strands of anti-Jewish ideology were coming together, attacking Jews not for living among the nations, but for recovering their homeland in the land of Israel. Anti-Semitism evolved as Jews did. 3 years after the Shoah, as the Jews resurrected their nation, the Arab League organized around the goal of destroying it. Now Weiss explains how communism took hold in America, especially on the college campuses. The Soviet Union opposed both religion and nationalism, so it targeted Judaism as the ultimate incarnation of both. Jews already dispersed around the world were deemed reactionary for wanting to return to Zion. Communist infiltration into America was so deviously successful that it conscripted many Jews and liberals into its ranks as useful idiots who promoted Stalinism while claiming to advance universal brotherhood and peace. Weiss now gives the ultimate example of how communists corrupted the scene. On November 10, 1975, the United Nations, led by its Soviet and Arab blocs, passed a resolution calling Zionism a form of racism and racial discrimination. It was a day of infamy, according to then Ambassador Daniel Patrick Moynihan. Yet, that belief now governs much of the American Academy, media, and parts of the Democratic Party. We've spoken about that in the past. Anti-Semitic coalitions powered the rise of Nazism. For the past half-century, anti-Zionism has done even better, forging pan-Arab Islamist coalitions in the Middle East, at the UN, and within Western democracies themselves. Now Weiss begins to conclude. She explains that today's hatred is a blend similar but different than the past. This ideological war against the Jews and Israel differentiates it from other current conflicts. Like the equally evil Russian invasion of Ukraine, little Israel is the proxy for mightier America. No intersectional campus coalitions celebrate Russia's atrocities in Ukraine. No Russian thugs pursue Jews in Brooklyn or burn Ukrainian flags with America's. That's because anti-Zionism is the ideological arm of the civilizational struggle against what is left of the free world, with the United States as its ultimate target. It may be perennial, but it has never penetrated and threatened this country so violently before. It intends to destroy if it is not stopped. Thank you, Ruth Weiss, for this spectacular, clear, concise, and cogent column. Next up is a column from Ynet. It was published on August 19th also, and it's authored by Alicia Ben Shimon, K-I-M-O-N. It's entitled, Financed by Iran, Inspired by Hamas, West Bank Terror Battalions Grow. Subtitled, and this is really the whole thing. Analysis, well-organized groups numbering dozens emerge in northern West Bank refugee camps, carrying out increasingly daring attacks that can post of social media to entice more recruits. Wow. This piece is chilling and so insightful. This is how Ben Shimon begins. Iran's terror arm, closest to Israel, is no longer Hamas or the Islamic Jihad, but battalions of terror operating in the West Bank against civilians and security forces. The initiative for localized terror squads or battalions developed in Jenin refugee camp in 2021-2022, and with time and funding of millions of shekels a year, mostly from Iran, they grew. This investment was bolstered those initiatives that are well armed thanks to the weapons being smuggled across the Jordanian border. Ben Shimon now explains the layout and the breakdown of the terror forces. Each battalion, he writes, has its commanders and field operatives responsible for obtaining weapons and delivering them, moneymen and technicians responsible for the technical side of the operations. They install networks of cameras to observe Israeli troop movements and to post recorded battles on social media. The battalions also use local children as lookouts and to run errands for the terrorists. Then there are the actual fighters. Ben Shimon explains that these are not a handful of people, but they are real organized groups, and a lot of groups at that, with a lot of people involved. These are terrorist groups. The battalions are made up, he writes, of dozens of terrorists who seek to aggrandize their prowess and the reputation of the camp they represent. Most are young, from lower social classes. Since the emergence of the Lion's Den terror group in Nablus and their fame on social media, more young Palestinians want to join these groups because the popularity of their members is an important factor in their fight, and their attacks are often posted on TikTok. Security forces estimate that there are 15 battalions currently active, most of them in the northern West Bank. The most notorious are in the Jenin refugee camp, in Nor Ar-Shams, near Tulkarm, and in Balata, the Balata refugee camp in Nablus. Terrorists are influenced by Hamas in Gaza and often use explosive devices in their attacks. Security officials say they observe attempts to copy Hamas's practices, placing IEDs on roads leading into camps, digging attack tunnels, launching rockets at Israeli communities across the border, and infiltrating into settlements. Ben Shimon now concludes, explaining the real concerns of the Israeli security systems. Israel is concerned, and this is what he writes, the concern of security officials is that forces who raid the refugee camps on a near daily basis will come up against lethal weapons such as anti-tank missiles or military-grade explosive devices. Such a scenario could transform the West Bank into a proper war zone. Another concern is that the terrorists will infiltrate into settlements and carry out attacks like the Hamas massacre of October 7th, in coordination with PA security forces. The IDF out-drills to respond to such scenarios. But most of all, the concern is that the use of local battalions would spread to more areas in the West Bank. Security officials say that they can observe aggressive efforts on the part of the PA to fight terrorist initiatives and arrest members of instigators, often under fire. They are mostly concerned with the authority and the Palestinian government and its ability to enforce order while terror groups challenge Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's leadership. This is an excellent, insightful column that shows us what Israel has come to confront now, and even more so in the future. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I'm going to show you 7 cartoons and memes today. Some of these cartoons, like the cartoons in the past over the last few months, are extremely biting, very much anti-Bibi, and downright vile and anti-Israel. Some are actually very funny on another level. This first cartoon portrays an irritated Bibi Netanyahu sitting on a chair, and the ceasefire talk table is hog-tied, tied up like a hog. The implication is that Israel is the obstacle to the deal, which is simply wrong. It's not correct. Next up is again the ceasefire talks table, and it's covered in blood. When you look closely, the blood is actually images of people shouting with their hands raised. Next up is a powerful and biting cartoon. Bibi Netanyahu is portrayed as Abraham in the story of Genesis sacrificing the ram. And Biden is God, stops him and says, don't. Bibi says to Biden, lâchez moi le bras, which means lick my arm to Biden. It means that in French. It is not a compliment. It is a curse in French. Next, the Israeli flag is drizzled with blood. The blood reads Gaza. The idea here is that Israel has destroyed Gaza and murdered Gaza. This next cartoon shows that the US is helping Israel. Well, it is. These last 2 cartoons are poking fun at the Secret Service. Once again, they are hilarious. These cartoons about the Secret Service will continue to pepper the media because the story continues to go on and just gets funnier or more ridiculous as it goes. This first one shows the characters from the 1960s TV show, The Wild Wild West. They were Secret Service agents protecting the president, President Lincoln. The title reads, "The Secret Service needs to bring these 2 back." That's funny. Finally, this last meme is just hilarious. The original Batman series, which aired between 1966 and 1968, starred Adam West. The sound effects were often still slides with words like bam and zoom. Watching it today is so much fun. In this case, Boy Wonder Robin is puzzled. He says, "Gosh, Batman, it's a sloped roof." And Batman responds, "We appear to be foiled again by our greatest villain, the Shingler." Shingler. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah recently said in a speech that the attack against Israel will include large intelligence base outside Tel Aviv. He said the Iran-backed terror group decided not to target civilian infrastructure and that Iranian Axis members decided to strike Israel separately. The terrorist organization Hezbollah published another announcement about the rocket launches toward Israel, stating that the first phase was successful. It was successfully completed. We launched more than 320 rockets, the report said. Hezbollah planned to attack a strategic site in the Tel Aviv area with thousands of projectiles, and officials said, including a possible attack against Ben Gurion Airport, in addition to striking hundreds of military facilities. That was the official Israeli report. The political bureau of the Houthis, Iran's proxy in Yemen, congratulated Hezbollah for a great and brave attack against Israel. According to the Houthis, quote, I'm quoting here, the reaction deep inside Israel confirms that the resistance is strong and loyal to its threats. We emphasize again that the Yemeni reaction will come. The days, nights, and terrain will prove it. The website of Ben Gurion International Airport crashed, apparently due to an overload of people checking on their flights. Earlier, the Israeli Airports Authority announced that following the situation assessment, Ben Gurion would return to regular activity at 7 a.m., including takeoffs and landings. So the Airports Authority asked the public to keep up to date with their flights on the Israeli Airports Authority website. Well, then there was an overload. It wasn't hacked, it was simply an overload. Egypt warned against the dangers of opening a new war front in Lebanon. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry said in a statement and called for stability in the region as Hezbollah and Israel are clashing once again. The United States continues to assess that the threat of attack against Israel by Iran and its proxy groups still exists. The Pentagon said after Hezbollah launched hundreds of rockets and drones at Israel in retaliation for the killing of a senior Hezbollah commander, quote, I would point you to some of the public comments that have been made by Iranian leaders and others. We continue to assess that there is a threat of attack, unquote. This was Pentagon spokesperson, Air Force Major General Patrick Ryder, when he told reporters at a live press conference. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with two Picanti pieces of information. I want to show you two clips today in the Picanti section. The first is former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett explaining that hating Israel is anti-Semitic. You can't separate the two. And he also explains the expression from the river to the sea. It's a very short clip. It's a shorty, they call it.
If you're anti-Zionist, are you also anti-Semitic? The short answer is yes. That's because anti-Semitism isn't just the persecution of individual Jews, it's also denying the Jewish people to collectively be a nation. Just like you can't say that Frenchman is okay, but France does not have the right to exist. So when you're out there chanting from the river to the sea, make Palestine free, you're anti-Semitic. Why is that? Let's see what the river and the sea are. This is the little state of Israel. By the way, it's surrounded by 22 Arab states, and all of Israel is the size of New Jersey. It's tiny. From here to here, it's about 1 hour. This little place, this little stream over here is called the Jordan River. It's actually something between a stream and a river. And over here is the Mediterranean Sea. So when you say from the river to the sea, make Palestine free, you're canceling the state of Israel. And that's where the Jews live. And that's why when you chant from the river to the sea, make Palestine free, that is a blatant anti-Semitic chant.
Then, a young boy named Nirya Granot sings the prayer for the soldiers of Israel. This prayer was written by Rabbi Shlomo Goren. He was the chief rabbi of the IDF and then the chief rabbi of Israel. The tune is taken from El Eretz Tzvi, a song written and composed by Yoram Gaon. This child's voice is so pure, so beautiful. The rendition is so heartwarming, it literally gives me chills every time I hear it.
אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, הוא יברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל, הוא יברך את חיילי צבא הגנה העומדים על משמר ארצנו, והרי אלוהינו מגבול הלבנון ועד מדבר מצרים ומן הים הגדול עד לבוא הערבה ביבשה באוויר ובים הוא יברך את חיילי צבא הגנה לישראל. ייתן אדוני את אויבינו הקמים עלינו ניגפים לפניהם. הקדוש ברוך הוא ישמור ויציל את חיילינו מכל צרה וצוקה ומכל נגע ומחלה, וישלח ברכה והצלחה בכל מעשה ידיהם. ידבר שונאינו תחתיהם ויעטרם בכתר ישועה ובעטרת ניצחון, ויקוים בהם הכתוב כי אדוני אלוהיכם ההולך עמכם להילחם לכם עם אויביכם להושיע אתכם ונאמר אמן.
That was so powerful. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.